I feel strong enough to sit up now, and Zayd brings me one of our camel saddles to lean upon. Make thyself comfortable, O my uncle. It gladdens my heart to see thee well after I had mourned thee for dead. Thou hast been a good friend to me, Zayd. What would I have done without thee all these years if thou hadst not followed my call and come to me? I have never regretted these years with thee, O my uncle. I still remember the day when I got thy letter, more than 5 years ago, calling me to Mecca. The thought of seeing thee again was dear to me, especially as in the meantime thou hadst been blessed with the blessing of Islam. But just then I had married a muntafiq girl, a virgin, and her love pleased me exceedingly. Those Iraqi girls, they have narrow waists and hard breasts like this. And, smiling with remembrance, he presses his forefinger against the hard pommel of the saddle on which I am leaning. And it is difficult to let their embraces go. So I told myself, I will go, but not just now. Let me wait for a few weeks. But the weeks passed, and the months, and although I soon divorced that woman, the daughter of a dog, she had been making eyes at her cousin. I could not make up my mind to forsake my job with the Iraqi Agail and my friends and the joys of Baghdad and Basra, and always told myself, not just now, after a little while, but one day I was riding away from our camp, where I had collected my monthly pay, and was thinking of spending the night in a friend's quarters, when suddenly thou camest to my mind, and I remembered what thou hadst told me in thy letter of thy dear Rafiqa's death. May God have mercy on her. And I thought of how lonely thou must be without her, and all at once I knew I had to go to thee. And there and then I pulled off the Iraqi star from my egal and threw it away, and then, without even going to my house to collect my clothes, I turned my dromedary's head toward the Nufud, toward Najd, and started out, stopping only at the next village to buy a waterskin and some provisions, and rode on until I met thee at Mecca 4 weeks later. And dost thou remember, Zayd, our first journey together into the interior of Arabia, southward to the palm orchards and wheat fields of Wadi Bisha, and thence to the sands of Rania, which had never before been trodden by a non-Arab? And how well I remember it, O my uncle. Thou wert so keen on seeing the empty quarter, where the jinns make the sands sing under the sun. And what about those Bedou living on its rim, who had never yet seen glass in their lives, and thought that thy eyeglasses were made of frozen water? They were like jinns themselves, reading in tracks in the sand, as other people read a book, and reading from the skies and from the air the coming of a sandstorm hours before it came. Dost thou recall, O my uncle, that guide we hired at Rania, that devil of a Bedouin whom thou wantest to shoot down when he was about to abandon us in the midst of the desert? How furious he was about the machine with which thou makest pictures. We both laugh at that adventure which lies so far behind us. But at the time we did not feel at all like laughing. We were about 6 or 7 days' journey south of Riyadh when that guide, a fanatical Bedouin from the Ikhwan settlement of Arrain, fell into a paroxysm of rage when I explained to him what my camera was for. He wanted to leave us there, and then because such heathenish picture-making endangered his soul. I would not have minded getting rid of him, had it not been that we were just then in a region with which neither Zayd nor I was familiar, and where, left to ourselves, we would certainly have lost our way. At first I tried to reason with our devil of a Bedouin, but to no avail. He remained adamant and turned back his camel toward Rania. I made it clear to him that it would cost him his life to leave to almost certain death from thirst. When, in spite of this warning, he set his dromedary in motion, I aimed my rifle at him and threatened to fire, with every intention of doing so. And this, at last, seemed to outweigh our friend's concern about his soul. After some grumbling, he agreed to lead us to the next large settlement, about 3 days ahead, where we could place our dispute before the Qadi for decision. Zayd and I disarmed him, and took turns standing guard during the night to prevent him from slipping away. The Qadi at Quwa'iyah, to whom we appealed for a few days later, at first gave judgment in favor of our guide. For, he said, it is shameful to make pictures of living beings, basing it on a wrong interpretation of a saying of the Prophet, For despite the belief so prevalent among many Muslims to this day, the depicting of living beings is forbidden, Islamic law contains no injunction to this effect. Thereupon I showed the Qadi the open letter from the king to all emirs of the land and everyone who may read this, and the Qadi's face grew longer and longer as he read. Muhammad Asad is our guest and friend, and dear unto us. And everyone who shows him friendliness shows it to us, and everyone who is hostile to him will be deemed hostile to us. Ibn Saud's words and seal had a magic effect on the severe Qadi, and he ultimately decided that under certain circumstances it might be permissible to make pictures. Nevertheless, we let our guide go, and hired another to lead us to Riyadh. And dost thou remember those days in Riyadh, O my uncle, when we were guests of the king, and thou wert so unhappy to see the old stables of the palace filled with shiny new motor cars, and the king's graciousness toward thee? And dost thou remember, Zayd, how he sent us out to explore the secrets behind the Bedouin rebellion, and how we journeyed through many nights and stole into Kuwait, and at last found out the truth about the cases of glittering new rials and rifles that were coming to the rebels from across the sea? And that other mission, O my uncle, when Sayyid Ahmed, may God lengthen his life, sent thee to Cyrenaica, and how we secretly crossed the sea to Egypt in a dhow, how we made our way to the Jebel Akhdar, eluding the vigilance of those Italians, may God's curse be upon them, and joined the Mujahideen under Umar al-Mukhtar. Those were exciting days. So we continue to remind each other of the many days, the innumerable days we have been together, and our dost thou remember, carries us far into the night, until the campfire flickers lower and lower, and only a few pieces of wood remain glowing. Zayd's face gradually recedes into the shadows, and itself becomes like a memory to my heavy eyes. In the starlit silence of the desert, with a tender lukewarm wind rippling the sands, the images of past and present intertwine, separate again, and call to one another with wondrous sounds of evocation, backward through the years, back to the beginning of my Arabian years, to my first pilgrimage to Mecca, and the darkness that overshadowed those early days, to the death of the woman who I loved, as I have loved no woman since, and who now lies buried under the soil of Mecca, under a simple stone without inscription, that marks the end of her road and the beginning of a new one for me, an end and a beginning, a call and an echo, strangely intertwined in the rocky valley of Mecca. Zayd, is there some coffee left? At thy command, O my uncle, answers Zayd. He rises without haste, the tall, narrow brass coffee pot in his left hand, and 2 minute handleless cups clinking in his right, one for me and one for himself. Pours a little coffee into the first cup and hands it to me. From under the shadow of the red and white checked kufiya, his eyes regard me with solemn intentness, as if this were a much more serious matter than a mere cup of coffee. These eyes, deep-set and long-lashed, austere and sad in repose, but ever ready to flash in sudden gaiety, speak of 100 generations of life and steps and freedom, the eyes of a man whose ancestors have never been exploited, and have never exploited others. But the most beautiful in him are his movements, serene, aware of their own rhythm, never hurried and never hesitant, a precision and economy that reminds you of the interplay of instruments in a well-ordered symphony orchestra. You see such movements often among Bedouins. The sparseness of the desert is reflected in them. For apart from the few towns and villages, life in Arabia has been so little molded by human hands that nature in her austerity has forced man to avoid all diffusion in behavior, and to reduce all doing dictated by his will or by outward necessity to a few, very definite basic forms, which have remained the same for countless generations, and have in time acquired the smooth sharpness of crystals. And this inherited simplicity of action is now apparent in the true Arab's gestures, as well as in his attitude toward life. Tell me, Zayd, where are we going tomorrow? Zayd looks at me with a smile. Why, oh my uncle, toward Taima, of course. No, brother, I wanted to go to Taima, but now I do not want it any more. We are going to Mecca.